When my dad died, my brother inherited our house and $44 million. Then he threw me out saying, "Get out of my house and don't ever come back." "You mean nothing now?" Days later, the lawyer laughed. "Did you even read the will?" My brother went pale because the will said, "Before I tell you about the absolute disaster that hit my brother and how he lost every single penny of that money, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments section below. I love seeing where my story is reaching. The heavy oak door didn't just close. It slammed with a force that rattled the frosted glass panes, echoing through the empty porch. I stood there on the top step, the rain soaking through the cheap fabric of my suit jacket, staring at the brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. My dad bought that knocker at a flea market 30 years ago when he bought the house. Now I was locked out on the wrong side of it. I looked down at my feet. Next to my scuffed dress shoes sat a single beat-up duffel bag. Inside were 3 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, my laptop, and a framed picture of my dad and me standing in front of the very first delivery truck he ever bought. That was it. That was my entire life, condensed into 20 pounds of canvas, sitting on a wet concrete porch. Through the thick glass, I could hear the faint, muffled sound of music starting up. It was a heavy bass beat, the kind that vibrated in your teeth. Elijah, my older brother, was already celebrating. Not even 6 hours after we watched our father's casket lowered into the ground, he was pouring top-shelf scotch and turning the living room into a VIP lounge. The driveway still smelled like fresh asphalt, and the cold, sharp scent of an autumn storm. Parked right in the center, taking up 2 spaces and angled like a middle finger to the world, was Elijah's Porsche Panamera. It was a ridiculous car, cherry red with custom rims, completely out of place in our quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood. It looked exactly like the man who drove it. Loud, expensive, and completely devoid of substance. I reached up and wiped the cold rain from my forehead. My hand was shaking, not from the cold, though the wind cutting through the trees was sharp enough to make my teeth chatter. I was shaking from the sheer, blinding shock of what had just happened in the hallway. "Get out of my house and don't ever come back. You mean nothing now." His words played on a loop in my head. He hadn't stuttered. He hadn't looked away. He had looked me dead in the eye, his jaw set, a smirk playing on the corner of his mouth, and he had erased my entire existence in 15 seconds. I had spent the last 5 years of my life running my father's company, managing his healthcare, paying the bills, making sure the lights stayed on while he fought a losing battle with his own lungs. Elijah had spent those 5 years doing absolutely nothing. And yet, when the dust settled, Elijah held the deed, the bank accounts, the legacy. $44 million. The entire valuation of Row Logistics, the commercial real estate, the liquid assets, the family home. All of it, handed to a man who couldn't even manage his own credit card bill without calling our uncle to bail him out. I slowly picked up the duffel bag. The nylon strap dug into my shoulder. Under my left arm, pressed tightly against my ribs beneath my wet jacket, I felt the hard edge of a thick, red manila folder. I didn't know what was inside it. I only knew that my dad had shoved it into my hands a week before he died. His grip surprisingly strong for a man who could barely breathe. I turned my back on the house. I walked down the driveway, the rain masking the tears of pure frustration that finally spilled over my eyelashes. I didn't look back at the glowing windows. I didn't look back at the Porsche. I just put my head down and walked into the dark, wet street. I had no car. I had no access to the company accounts. My salary had been suspended by Elijah that morning. I was 28 years old, and I was suddenly terrifyingly homeless. But as my wet shoes hit the pavement, a cold, hard knot of clarity began to form in the pit of my stomach. Elijah thought he had won. He thought he had the ultimate inheritance. But he had forgotten one crucial thing about our father. Edward Rowe was a lot of things, but he was never a fool, and he never ever left a job half-finished. To understand how I ended up standing on the street in the pouring rain with nothing but a duffel bag, you have to understand the dynamic of the Rowe family. You have to understand the last 5 years. My dad, Edward, was a force of nature. He built Row Logistics out of a single rusty box truck that he bought at a police auction in the late 80s. He drove the routes himself, loading and unloading freight until his hands were calloused and his back ached. By the time I was born, he had a fleet of 50 trucks. By the time I was in high school, he owned massive distribution warehouses across 3 states. He was a blue-collar king, a man who believed in sweat equity, early mornings, and honoring a handshake. And then there was Elijah. Elijah was 4 years older than me, and from the moment he could walk, he was the golden child. He was charming, he was loud, he played quarterback in high school, and he knew exactly how to smile to get out of trouble. While I was in the garage helping Dad change the oil on the trucks, Elijah was out at pool parties. My dad, despite all his tough talk about hard work, had a massive blind spot when it came to his firstborn. He thought Elijah's arrogance was confidence. He thought his recklessness was entrepreneurial spirit. When Elijah was 18, my dad set up a massive college fund for him. Elijah blew through the entire college fund in 3 semesters at a private university, dropping out to start a lifestyle brand that went bankrupt in 6 months. Dad just sighed and paid off his debts. Then, 5 years ago, the cough started. It was a persistent, dry hack that Dad blamed on warehouse dust. But the dust didn't explain the weight loss or the gray tint to his skin. The diagnosis was brutal and swift. Advanced pulmonary fibrosis. The doctors gave him 3 to 5 years. The day we got the news, we sat in the sterile white office of the pulmonologist. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I looked over at Elijah, expecting to see my brother in tears. Instead, Elijah was looking at his Apple Watch, tapping his foot impatiently. That was the day the invisible line was drawn in our family. As Dad's health deteriorated, I stepped into the breach. I was 23, fresh out of a state business school, and I practically moved into the company headquarters. I learned the routing software, I negotiated union contracts, I handled the massive logistical nightmare of keeping a multimillion-dollar supply chain moving. And when I wasn't at the office, I was at the house. I was the one managing Dad's oxygen tanks, organizing his pill organizers, talking to the home care nurses. I gave up my 20s. I didn't date. I didn't travel. My life was a pendulum swinging between boardrooms and hospital rooms. And where was Elijah? He was officially an executive vice president at Row Logistics, but his office was usually empty. He was in Vegas or Miami or on a ski trip in Aspen. He would fly in for a board meeting wearing a custom Italian suit, shake a few hands, take credit for a profitable quarter that I had engineered, and then fly out again. I remember one specific night in late November, about a year before Dad passed. It was 2 a.m., and I was sitting in a hard plastic chair in the emergency room. Dad had caught a minor respiratory infection that rapidly escalated into pneumonia. His chest was heaving, the monitors were beeping frantically, and the smell of rubbing alcohol and fear hung heavy in the air. The doctors were talking about intubation. I was terrified. I pulled out my phone and dialed Elijah's number. It went straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Dad in bad shape. Get here now." Nothing. I called again. Nothing. At 6 a.m., as the sun was finally coming up and Dad had stabilized, the hospital room door opened. But it wasn't Elijah. It was Uncle Robert. Robert was Dad's younger brother, a man who had spent his entire life living in Dad's shadow. Robert had gone through a vicious divorce a decade ago, lost custody of his kids, and ended up working as a consultant for Row Logistics, which was basically Dad's way of giving him charity. Robert always dressed a little too sharply, smiled a little too widely, and had eyes that constantly darted around the room, assessing value. "How is he?" Robert asked, running a hand through his slicked-back gray hair. "Stable for now," I croaked, my throat dry. "Have you heard from Elijah? I've been calling him all night." Robert let out a soft sigh and patted my shoulder. "Give your brother a break, Mason. He was entertaining some very important clients in Chicago. He's closing a big deal. You know how much pressure he's under to be the face of the company." My jaw clenched. A thick vein throbbed in my temple. Important clients? Uncle Robert, I saw his Instagram story 4 hours ago. He's at a nightclub taking shots of tequila. Robert's eyes hardened for a fraction of a second before the warm, patronizing mask slipped back into place. You need to understand your role, Mason. You're the operations guy. You're good with the spreadsheets and the nurses. Elijah is the visionary. He handles the big picture. Don't let jealousy ruin your perspective. Jealousy. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I wasn't jealous of his hangovers or his fake friends. I just wanted my brother to be a son. But as I looked at Uncle Robert, I realized something dark. Robert wasn't just making excuses for Elijah. He was enabling him. He was building an alliance with the heir apparent. I turned back to look at my father, sleeping fitfully under the harsh fluorescent lights, and I realized I was completely alone. The dynamic at home bled directly into the corporate culture at Row Logistics. As Dad's presence at the office faded to once-a-week visits, the power vacuum was quickly filled by the illusion of Elijah, propped up by the whispering machinations of Uncle Robert. I was doing the work of 3 men. I was handling the dispatchers, fighting with the maintenance crews to keep the aging fleet on the road, and aggressively expanding our client base into the e-commerce sector. I worked 70-hour weeks. My salary remained the same, a modest middle management wage that Dad insisted on, claiming it built character. I didn't care about the money at the time. I cared about keeping the company solvent for my father. Then came the crisis of 2024. We had a massive contract with a national retail chain to distribute their holiday inventory across the Midwest. A freak blizzard shut down 3 major interstates, and our primary distribution hub in Ohio suffered a catastrophic roof collapse under the weight of the snow. Millions of dollars of inventory were trapped, deadlines were blowing past us, and the retail chain threatened a lawsuit that would have bankrupted us. It was a nightmare. I moved a cot into my office. For 48 straight hours, I didn't sleep. I rerouted trucks through secondary state highways, negotiated emergency leases on temporary warehouse space in Indiana, and personally coordinated with local snowplow services to dig out our stranded drivers. It was a logistical miracle. By the skin of our teeth, we delivered the inventory. The client dropped the lawsuit and I was exhausted, running on black coffee and adrenaline, but I felt a deep sense of pride. I had saved my father's legacy. 2 weeks later, Dad insisted on coming into the office for a quarterly board meeting to celebrate the victory. He was frail, wheeling his oxygen tank behind him, but his eyes were bright. The boardroom was packed with our senior management team, including David, our chief financial officer. David was a numbers guy with the personality of a wet napkin, a man who always calculated the political wins before speaking. Dad stood at the head of the long mahogany table. He looked around the room, and then his eyes landed on Elijah. Elijah, who had been in Cabo San Lucas during the entire blizzard crisis. The last few weeks have tested us, Dad said, his voice raspy but firm. We faced a disaster that could have ended Row Logistics, but we survived. We thrived, and we did it because of leadership. I sat up a little straighter in my chair. Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He slid it across the polished wood table toward Elijah. Elijah, Dad said, smiling warmly, your strategic oversight from afar, your ability to keep the high-level clients calm, it shows you are ready. I'm officially giving you the promotion to President of Operations. Elijah grinned, a perfectly white, arrogant smile. He opened the box. Inside, gleaming under the recessed lighting, was a solid gold Rolex Daytona, rimmed with diamonds. It was a $40,000 watch. Thanks, Pop, Elijah said, strapping it onto his wrist. It was a team effort, obviously, but I'm glad the strategy held up. I sat there, frozen. I looked at David, the CFO. David looked down at his notes, actively avoiding my gaze. I looked at Uncle Robert, who was sitting next to Elijah, clapping loudly. Robert caught my eye and gave me a slow, deliberate wink. My chest tightened. It wasn't about the watch. It was about the erasure of my reality. I had bled for this company. I had saved it, and I was sitting there in a wrinkled button-down shirt, earning my standard salary, watching my brother take the crown for a war he didn't even fight. After the meeting, I cornered Dad in his private office. He was sitting in his large leather chair, looking exhausted, adjusting his nasal cannula. "Dad," I started, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. Elijah wasn't even in the country during the crisis. I handled the routing. I handled the leases. I negotiated with the client. Dad looked up at me. His eyes, usually sharp, looked incredibly tired. "I know you did the heavy lifting, Mason. You always do. You're the engine. Then why did you give him the promotion? Why the watch?" I demanded. Dad sighed, leaning his head back against the chair. "Because Elijah needs the validation. He needs the title to feel important. The board respects optics, Mason. Elijah looks the part. You don't need a watch to know your worth. You have the grit. He doesn't." "That's not fair, Dad. Business isn't fair. Family isn't fair," he said softly. "Just trust me, Mason. Keep your head down. Keep the engine running. I have a plan for all of this. You just have to be patient." Patience. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I walked out of that office feeling like a ghost. I didn't know then that Dad's plan was far more complex and far more dangerous than a simple promotion. I just thought he was a blind father protecting a weak son. The end came faster than any of the doctors predicted. A year after the boardroom incident, Dad's lungs simply gave out. He was moved to hospice care within our family home. The big house, once full of life and the loud arguments of our youth, felt like a tomb. The only sound was the constant, rhythmic hissing of the oxygen concentrator. It was a Tuesday night, exactly 1 week before he died. A heavy rainstorm was battering the windows, much like the night I would eventually be thrown out. I was sitting in the armchair next to his hospital bed, reading a book under the dim glow of a reading lamp. The hospice nurse had just finished her rounds and gone downstairs. Suddenly, Dad's hand shot out from under the blankets. His grip, usually weak, was shockingly strong as he grabbed my wrist. His eyes were wide open, staring intensely at me. "Mason," he gasped, fighting for air. "I'm here, Dad. Take it easy. Let me adjust the oxygen." I reached for the dial, but he slapped my hand away. "No, listen to me." He struggled to sit up slightly. He reached under his pillow and pulled out a thick, heavy, red manila folder. He shoved it against my chest. "Take this. Hide it. Don't show it to Elijah. Don't show it to Robert." I took the folder. Felt heavy, substantial. "What is this, Dad?" His breathing was ragged, wet, and terrifying to listen to. He pulled me closer by my shirt collar. His breath smelled of medicine and decay. "When the time comes, when I'm gone, they are going to tell you a story. Elijah, Robert, the lawyers, they are going to tell you how it is." He paused, coughing violently. I held my breath, terrified he was going to die right then and there. When he finally caught his breath, his eyes bored into mine with a terrifying clarity. "Don't trust what you hear," he whispered fiercely. "Read everything, every single page. And when the dust settles, find Halverson. Only Halverson." "Halverson? Your corporate lawyer?" I asked, confused. Dad hadn't used Mr. Halverson for personal matters in years. "Promise me, Mason. Promise me you won't react. You wait. You read. You find Halverson." "I promise, Dad," I said, my voice breaking. He fell back onto the pillows, the energy completely draining from his body. His eyes closed. He never spoke another coherent sentence after that night. He slipped into a coma 2 days later, and 5 days after that, on a quiet Sunday morning, his heart finally stopped. The funeral was a circus. It was a massive affair, attended by hundreds of employees, vendors, and local politicians. It felt less like a mourning of a great man and more like a networking event. I stood in the front row at the cemetery, the cold wind whipping my black tie over my shoulder. I looked at the polished mahogany casket, feeling a hollow ache in my chest that was so deep it felt physical. I had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, but you are never really ready to become an orphan. I looked over at Elijah. He was standing next to Uncle Robert. Elijah was wearing a custom black suit that probably cost more than my car. He had sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. And as the priest was delivering the final eulogy, talking about Dad's legacy of hard work, I saw Elijah look down. He was holding his iPhone down by his hip, his thumb rapidly scrolling. He was checking his messages. At our father's burial, Uncle Robert noticed me looking. He placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. Elijah put the phone away and quickly adjusted his face into a mask of somber grief, dabbing at a dry eye with a pristine white handkerchief. I felt sick to my stomach, patted my chest. Under my suit jacket, tucked safely against my ribs, was the red folder. Don't trust what you hear. Dad's voice echoed in my mind. The dirt was thrown onto the casket. The final prayers were said, and the crowd began to disperse. I didn't know it yet, but the funeral wasn't the end of the tragedy. It was just the ringing of the bell for the real war to begin. We returned to the family house for the traditional reception. The caterers had set up a massive spread in the dining room. The house was packed with people murmuring condolences, eating tiny sandwiches, and drinking Dad's expensive wine. I was standing in the corner of the kitchen, nursing a glass of water, feeling completely detached from the reality around me. I just wanted everyone to leave so I could finally sleep. Around 5 p.m., the last of the guests filtered out. The front door clicked shut, leaving only the immediate family and a few key company figures in the massive living room. It was me, Elijah, Uncle Robert, and David, the CFO. Elijah walked over to the wet bar, poured himself a generous measure of Macallan 18, and took a long sip. He didn't look like a man who had just buried his father. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. He set the glass down with a loud clack on the granite counter and turned to face me. The mask of grief was completely gone, replaced by a cold, hard arrogance. "All right, let's get down to business," Elijah said, clapping his hands together once. "We need to talk about the transition." I frowned, setting my water glass down. "Transition? Elijah, Dad's body isn't even cold yet. Can we do this on Monday?" "No, we do this now," Elijah snapped. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. He tossed it onto the coffee table. "This is a power of attorney and an emergency executor decree, signed by Dad last month, notarized and filed. It grants me immediate, sole control over the estate and row logistics pending the final probate." I stared at the paper. Sole control? That doesn't make sense. Dad always said we would run the company together. Dad said a lot of things to keep you happy, so you'd keep wiping his chin, Elijah sneered. He took another sip of his scotch. But when it came down to the wire, he knew who had the vision. "I am the sole heir, Mason. The house, the company, the 44 million. All of it." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at David. "David, is this true? You handle the corporate structuring." David adjusted his glasses, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked firmly at the floor. "The paperwork is legally binding, Mason. Elijah is the acting CEO and sole manager of the estate assets as of this afternoon." David had flipped. The man who had relied on my operational data for 5 years had instantly calculated the new power dynamic and aligned himself with the money. I turned to Uncle Robert. He was sitting in Dad's favorite leather armchair, his legs crossed, looking deeply sympathetic. "I'm sorry, Mason," Robert said, his voice dripping with fake pity. "I tried to talk to Edward about it, but he was very traditional. He believed the eldest son should inherit the mantle. You have to accept it. Fighting it will only tear the family apart." Tear the family apart. The family was already dead. I looked back at Elijah. "Fine. You want to run the company? Run it. Let's see how long it takes you to crash it without me doing your job for you. But I live here. This is my home." Elijah laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. "Not anymore." The room went dead silent. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dropping an octave. Elijah stepped forward, invading my personal space. The smell of scotch was overpowering. "You're a liability, Mason. You're resentful, you're a buzzkill, and I don't want you in my house. I don't want you in my company. As of right now, your employment at Row Logistics is terminated. Your corporate cards are canceled. And you have exactly 10 minutes to pack a bag and get off my property." My vision literally swam. It was a physical blow. "You're throwing me out? Today? Where the hell am I supposed to go?" "I don't care," Elijah said, his eyes dead and cold. "Go live in a truck. Go cry to a nurse. Just get out of my house and don't ever come back." "You mean nothing now." I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. 5 years of my life, my youth, my dedication, all of it meant nothing. I looked at David. Silence. I looked at Uncle Robert. He just offered a sad little shrug. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. When someone shows you they are a monster, you don't try to reason with them. I turned around, walked upstairs to my room, threw a few clothes into a duffel bag, grabbed my laptop, and walked out the front door into the freezing rain. I walked for 3 miles in the pouring rain. Every car that drove past splashed dirty water onto my slacks. I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel anything except a burning, hollow sensation in my chest. My mind was racing, trying to process the speed at which my entire life had been dismantled. I ended up on Route 9, a depressing stretch of highway on the edge of town lined with fast food joints and cheap motels. I found a place called the Starlight Motor Inn. The S and the T on the neon sign were burned out. It was the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and industrial bleach. I paid for 3 nights with the last $200 of personal cash I had in my wallet. The guy behind the bulletproof glass didn't even look up at me. I let myself into room 114. The carpet was sticky. The bedspread was a questionable shade of brown. I dropped my wet duffel bag on the floor, took off my soaked jacket, and sat on the edge of the sagging mattress. The silence of the room was deafening. Just hours ago, I was standing in a multimillion-dollar estate. Now I was a refugee in a $30 night trap. I buried my face in my hands. A wave of profound grief finally hit me, not just for the loss of my father, but for the realization that I had never really had a brother. Then, I remembered the folder. I reached inside my wet jacket and pulled out the red manila envelope. The edges were slightly damp, but the contents were protected. My hands were shaking as I unwound the little red string holding it closed. Don't trust what you hear. Read everything. I opened the folder, expecting to find a secret will, a deed, some grand legal document that would instantly fix everything. I tipped it upside down over the bed. 3 things fell out. A small silver key, a black Visa debit card with my name on it, and a single piece of heavy cardstock paper with Dad's familiar, scrawling handwriting. I stared at the items, confused. I picked up the note. It was dated exactly 1 month before he died. "Mason, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means Elijah did exactly what I feared he would do. I know you are hurting right now. I know you feel betrayed. I am sorry to put you through this pain, but I had to know for sure. Elijah's inheritance is an illusion. Everything is a trap. The debit card has enough funds to keep you afloat for a few days. The key is to my private safety deposit box at First National. Do not go there yet. Take a breath. Gather your anger. Use it. Then go find Halverson. Love, Dad." I read the note 3 times. Elijah's inheritance is an illusion. Everything is a trap. The knot of despair in my stomach suddenly dissolved, replaced by a sharp, electric jolt of adrenaline. My father hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't been blind to Elijah's true nature. He had orchestrated this entire scenario. He had intentionally given Elijah the power just to see what he would do with it. And Elijah, in his infinite arrogance, had walked right into the snare. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a weapon that my father had carefully primed. I lay back on the terrible motel pillows, staring up at the water stains on the ceiling. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over me. I was gonna ruin my brother. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving a gray, overcast sky. I woke up early, showered in a bathroom where the hot water lasted exactly 3 minutes, and bought a stale coffee from the lobby vending machine. I sat at the small, wobbly desk in my room and opened my laptop. I tried to log into my Row Logistics corporate email to access some vendor files. Access denied. Account disabled. Elijah had been thorough. He had completely locked me out of the digital infrastructure of the company I built. As I was staring at the screen, my cell phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Mason? It's Chloe." A hushed, frantic voice whispered. Chloe was my executive assistant. She was a brilliant, hardworking single mother who basically ran the operational floor when I was in meetings. She was fiercely loyal to me. "Chloe, why are you calling from an unknown number?" "I bought a burner phone on the way to work," she whispered. "Mason, it's a madhouse here. Elijah walked in this morning acting like a dictator. He fired 3 senior dispatchers before 9 a.m. just to show dominance. Morale is in the toilet. But that's not why I'm calling." "What's going on?" I asked, leaning closer to the phone. "I stayed late last night after the funeral to process some backlog. I was walking past Elijah's office, and the door was cracked open. He was in there with Uncle Robert." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "Mason, Robert isn't trying to help Elijah run the company. He's helping him gut it." My grip tightened on the phone. "Gut it? What do you mean?" "Elijah owes money, Mason. A lot of money. Millions. To some very bad people in Vegas and Atlantic City. They've been calling the corporate line, leaving threatening messages. I intercepted a few of them. Uncle Robert knows about the debt. He told Elijah the only way to pay it off and maintain his lifestyle is to liquidate assets immediately. They can't liquidate without board approval," I said, my mind racing. "They don't need it," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "Robert brought in his own private lawyers. They are structuring a deal to sell the main commercial real estate, the headquarters, the Ohio hub, and the truck yards to a holding company. They're going to lease it back to Row Logistics at an exorbitant rate to bleed the operating cash dry." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Who owns the holding company? I looked up the LLC registration on the state database before they locked me out of the system, Chloe said. "The holding company is registered to a trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust is Robert Rowe." The pieces slammed into place. Uncle Robert, the sympathetic uncle, the man who told me to know my role. He had been playing the long game. He hated my father for being successful while he was a failure. He had manipulated Elijah's ego, inflated his debts, and waited for my father to die. Now, he was using Elijah as a useful idiot to steal the entire $44 million empire out from under him, while Elijah thought he was just getting cash to pay off bookies and buy sports cars. And the only person who would have seen the numbers, the only person who would have stopped it, was me. That's why Robert didn't stop Elijah from throwing me out. Robert probably gave him the idea. "Chloe," I said, my voice eerily calm, "I need you to do something incredibly dangerous. Can you get into the physical filing cabinets in David's office? I need the draft contracts for that real estate sale. I need physical proof." "David changed the locks," she said. "But he's an idiot and keeps the spare key under his desk mat. I can get them during lunch. Get them. Take pictures of every page. Send them to my personal email, then put the files exactly back where they were. If anyone catches you, you pretend you were looking for an HR form. Understand?" "I got it, Mason. We miss you here. He's going to destroy this place." "He's not going to destroy anything, Chloe, because he doesn't own it." I hung up the phone. The betrayal was absolute. My brother was a greedy fool, but my uncle was a venomous snake. I looked at the debit card Dad had left me. I grabbed my jacket. It was time to go to war. It was time to find Halverson. Downtown was a completely different world from Route 9. It was a world of towering glass and steel, where money moved silently through fiber optic cables and power was negotiated in soundproof rooms. The offices of Halverson and Pike occupied the entire penthouse floor of the tallest building in the financial district. Mr. Halverson wasn't just a lawyer. He was a legal architect for the ultra-wealthy. He specialized in impenetrable trusts, aggressive corporate defense, and making massive problems disappear quietly. I stepped off the private elevator into a lobby that looked like an art museum. The floors were imported Italian marble, and the walls were paneled in rich, dark walnut. Behind a massive slab of white marble that served as a desk sat a young man named Julian. Julian wore a tailored suit and had the arrogant, slightly bored expression of someone who spent his day turning away millionaires. I walked up to the desk. I was still wearing the same suit from the funeral, slightly wrinkled from my stay at the motel. "Can I help you?" Julian asked, not bothering to look up from his dual monitors. His tone implied that I was entirely in the wrong building. "I need to see Mr. Halverson," I said. Julian sighed, a tiny, performative exhalation of breath. Finally, he looked up, his eyes scanning my wrinkled jacket. "Mr. Halverson requires an appointment. Currently, he is booked out for the next 6 weeks. If you'd like to leave your name, I can have a junior associate call you to see if your matter meets our firm's criteria." "I don't need a junior associate," I said, leaning my palms flat on the cold marble desk, forcing Julian to lean back slightly. "My name is Mason Rowe. My father was Edward Rowe. And I know for a fact Mr. Halverson is expecting me." Julian's fingers hovered over his keyboard. The name Rowe meant something in this city, and it certainly meant something in this firm. He picked up a sleek black phone and pressed a single button. "Mr. Halverson, there is a Mason Rowe here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." There was a brief pause. Then, a deep, resonant voice came through the speakerphone, loud enough for me to hear. "Send him in immediately, Julian, and hold all my calls." Julian's arrogant demeanor vanished instantly. He stood up, smoothing his tie. "Right this way, Mr. Rowe." He led me down a long hallway lined with abstract art and opened 2 massive double doors. Mr. Halverson's office was breathtaking. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city skyline. Halverson himself was standing behind his desk. He was a man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed in a navy pinstripe suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a completely bald head. He radiated a quiet, dangerous authority. As the doors closed behind me, Halverson smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess grandmaster who just watched his opponent make the exact wrong move. "Mason," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "Have a seat. I must admit I was starting to worry. You are a day late. I expected you yesterday." I sat down. It took me a day to process the fact that my brother threw me out of my own house on the day of my father's funeral. Halverson didn't look surprised. He walked around his desk and sat opposite me, steepling his fingers. "Ah, so Elijah played his hand immediately. How very predictable. And I assume he brandished the emergency power of attorney your father signed." "He did. And he told me he inherited everything. The house, the money, the company." I looked Halverson dead in the eye. "My dad left me a note. He told me it was an illusion. He told me to find you." Halverson nodded slowly. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick, bound document. It wasn't a standard file. It had a heavy, blue legal backing and was sealed with a wax stamp. "Your father," Halverson said softly, "was one of the most brilliant men I have ever had the pleasure of representing. He came to me 6 months ago. He knew his time was short. He also knew exactly who your brother was, and he suspected the insidious influence of your Uncle Robert." Halverson slid the heavy document across the desk toward me. "What Elijah holds is a temporary executorship. It is a legal piece of paper, yes, but it is entirely subordinate to this." He tapped the document. "Mason, did you really think your father would leave $44 million to a man who treats life like a casino?" I looked down at the document. The title page read, "The Edward Rowe Revocable Living Trust." "I don't understand." I said. If this is the real Will, why didn't you stop Elijah yesterday? Why let him throw me out? Halverson leaned forward, his sharp eyes locking onto mine. Because this isn't a simple will, Mason. A will goes through probate court. A will can be contested. A will gives Elijah and Robert the opportunity to hire lawyers, drag things out for years, and bleed the estate dry in legal fees. Your father didn't want a war of attrition. He wanted an execution. Halverson opened the document and flipped to a page near the middle. He highlighted a specific section with his gold pen. Your father transferred every single asset, the house, the company, the bank accounts, into this trust before he died. When he passed, the trust became irrevocable. Elijah is named as the primary trustee. That gives him the illusion of power. That's why the CFO and the banks listen to him. However, his position as trustee is entirely conditional. My heart started to beat faster. Conditional on what? On a poison pill clause your father and I drafted very carefully, Halverson explained, a hint of professional pride in his voice. Section 4, Paragraph B. Elijah's control over the trust assets is contingent upon him providing a permanent, rent-free residence for you in the family home and maintaining your employment and salary at Row Logistics. I stopped breathing. I stared at the legal jargon on the page, the words blurring slightly. If Elijah violates that condition, Halverson continued, his voice lowering, if he evicts you or fires you, the poison pill automatically triggers. Elijah's status as trustee is instantly revoked. He is legally stripped of all authority, all access, and all inheritance. He doesn't get a dime. He doesn't get a single share of the company. The genius of it hit me like a physical shockwave. Dad didn't just protect me. He weaponized Elijah's own greed against him. He gave Elijah enough rope to hang himself, knowing that Elijah's arrogance wouldn't allow him to share power. And if he loses it all, I whispered, looking up at the lawyer. Where does it go? Upon the triggering of the clause, Halverson said, leaning back in his chair and offering a genuine, satisfied smile, the trust automatically designates a new, permanent and sole beneficiary of the entire $44 million estate. He tapped his pen against the desk. You, Mason, you get everything. Clean, clear, and uncontestable by any court in this state. The silence in the office was profound. High above the city traffic, I sat there absorbing the magnitude of my father's love. He hadn't just watched me suffer for 5 years. He had seen every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of disrespect I endured from my brother and my uncle, and he had engineered the ultimate, inescapable trap to secure my future. By throwing you out of the house and firing you, Halverson said, breaking the silence. Elijah didn't claim his empire. He legally signed it all over to you. A slow, hard smile spread across my face. The pain, the grief, the humiliation of standing in the rain. It all evaporated, replaced by cold, righteous anticipation. So, I said, my voice steady, how do we pull the trigger? Halverson opened a fresh legal pad. We need irrefutable proof of the violation. We need proof he evicted you, and proof he terminated your employment. We secure the evidence. We file an emergency injunction to freeze all trust assets. And then, Halverson's smile matched mine. We go pay your brother a visit. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had the text from Chloe about my disabled accounts. And I knew exactly how to get the proof of the eviction. Give me 2 hours, I told Halverson. I'll give you the rope. You tie the noose. Give me 2 hours, I told Halverson. I'll give you the rope. You tie the noose. I walked out of that high-rise office building and onto the busy sidewalk. The cold city air hit my face, but I didn't feel the chill anymore. I felt entirely awake. For 5 years, I had been playing a defensive game, constantly absorbing the hits from my brother and my uncle, trying to keep my father's company afloat. Now, the rules had changed. I was on the offense, and I had the full weight of the law behind me. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had dialed 1,000 times before. It belonged to Sarah, our family housekeeper. She had worked for my parents since I was in middle school. She was a quiet, fiercely observant woman who had watched me sacrifice my 20s to care for my dying father, and she had watched Elijah treat our home like a hotel. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Mason." Her voice was a hushed whisper. "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you called. Are you okay? Where are you staying?" "I'm fine, Sarah. I'm safe," I said, leaning against the stone facade of a bank building. "But I need your help. I need to know exactly what is happening at the house right now." I could hear the faint sound of loud music in the background of her call. "It's a nightmare," she whispered, her voice tight with anger. "Elijah has people over. Awful people. They are drinking your father's vintage wine. They are tracking mud on the carpets. He told me to clean up after them like I'm a waitress at a cheap bar. He acts like he owns the world. He doesn't own anything, Sarah, and I'm going to prove it today. But I need evidence." I took a deep breath. The security cameras, the one above the front porch and the one in the main hallway. Do they still record audio? "Yes," she said immediately. "Your father upgraded the system last year. It records everything to the cloud server." "Elijah locked me out of the digital network," I explained. "I need you to log into the main computer in Dad's study. Download the footage from 3 days ago, right after the funeral. The exact moment he threw me out. I need the video, and I need the audio of him telling me I'm evicted." There was a brief pause on the line. Then, Sarah's voice came back, entirely devoid of fear. "He is sitting in the living room with some man named Marcus. They are arguing about money. The study is empty. Give me 10 minutes. Sarah, if he catches you—" "He won't catch me," she interrupted fiercely. "He doesn't even know how to turn that computer on. I loved your father, Mason, and I know who the real son is. I'll send it to your personal email." 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. 2 massive video files sat in my inbox. I clicked the first one. It was the porch camera. The high-definition video showed me standing in the rain, holding my bag. Then the heavy door swung open. Elijah's face filled the frame. The audio was crystal clear. "Get out of my house and don't ever come back. You mean nothing now." I forwarded the files directly to Halverson. Then, I opened the second email I had received earlier that day. It was from Chloe, my assistant. True to her word, she had snuck into the CFO's office. Attached were high-resolution photographs of the draft contracts Uncle Robert had drawn up. They detailed the exact plan to sell our massive commercial real estate portfolio to a dummy corporation owned by Robert himself. It was a textbook corporate bleed-out. Finally, I needed the last nail in the coffin. I needed proof of my termination. I called Chloe back. "Did Human Resources process my termination?" I asked her. "Yes," Chloe confirmed. "Elijah marched into HR yesterday morning and demanded they cut you off. They generated the official termination notice and the Cobra insurance paperwork. It was sent via certified mail to your last known address." "Which is the family house," I said. "Where Elijah currently is." "Exactly. But they also generated a digital PDF for the corporate records. I have a copy right here." "Send it to the lawyer," I said, giving her Halverson's email address. I walked back into the lobby of the law firm and took the elevator up to the penthouse. When I walked back into Halverson's office, he was off the phone, adjusting his cuffs. His paralegals were running around like an army preparing for battle. "I have the footage of the eviction," I said, putting my phone on his desk. "I have the termination paperwork. And I have proof of Uncle Robert's intent to commit massive corporate fraud." Halverson smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. "I just got off the phone with Judge Harmon. We have a long history. He reviewed the terms of the revocable living trust and the evidence you just provided. He signed an emergency ex parte injunction." "What does that mean in English?" I asked. "It means," Halverson said, picking up a heavy stack of papers stamped with a red seal, "that as of 5 minutes ago, Elijah Rowe's status as trustee is officially and legally terminated. All corporate bank accounts are frozen. The house belongs to you, and anyone currently on the property without your permission is guilty of criminal trespassing. Halverson stood up and grabbed his tailored overcoat. Shall we go take out the trash? We didn't take a taxi. Halverson had a black car waiting downstairs. We drove out of the city and into the quiet, affluent suburbs where I grew up. But we didn't go alone. Following closely behind our black car were 2 white and green sheriff's department cruisers. Halverson didn't mess around with local beat cops. He called the county sheriff's civil enforcement division. When you are executing a high-value property seizure and an eviction on a $44 million estate, you bring the heavy artillery. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a bruised, heavy gray. We turned onto my street. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a heavy, rhythmic thud. This was the street where I learned to ride a bike. This was the street where my dad taught me how to drive his first delivery truck. And now it was the street where I was going to ruin my own flesh and blood. We pulled into the long, winding driveway. Elijah's red Porsche was still parked diagonally across the pavement. 2 other luxury cars were parked on the lawn, tearing up the expensive landscaping. I stepped out of the black car. The air was cold. The front doors of the sheriff's cruisers opened, and 2 massive deputies stepped out. They wore thick tactical vests and carried heavy flashlights. They looked at Halverson, who gave them a brief nod. We walked up the steps to the porch. The same porch where I had stood freezing and homeless 3 days ago. The bass from the music inside was vibrating the porch floorboards. Halverson didn't use the brass knocker. He gestured to the largest deputy. The deputy raised a massive fist and began hammering on the heavy oak door. It sounded like thunder. "Sheriff's Department, open the door," the deputy bellowed. The music inside abruptly cut off. I could hear shouting, the clinking of glass, and the sound of heavy footsteps. The door swung open. Elijah stood there. He was wearing an expensive silk shirt unbuttoned to his chest, holding a glass of amber liquid. His eyes were red, his hair was messy, and he had the arrogant scowl of a man who was used to doing whatever he wanted. "What the hell is going on here?" Elijah snapped, glaring at the deputies. "Do you know whose house this is? I didn't call the cops." Then, his eyes shifted past the deputies and landed on me. His scowl deepened into pure, unadulterated hatred. "Mason," he spat out the word like poison. "I told you to never come back here. Are you actually stupid enough to bring the police to my house? I own this property. I'll have you arrested for trespassing." He looked at Halverson. "And who the hell are you?" Halverson stepped forward, his posture impeccable, radiating absolute authority. "My name is Arthur Halverson. I was your father's personal attorney, and I am the executor of the Edward Rowe Revocable Living Trust." Elijah scoffed, taking a sip of his drink. "Executor? The will was already executed. I have the power of attorney. My dad left everything to me. This is my house. You're trespassing." Halverson didn't blink. He pulled the thick, court-stamped document from his briefcase and held it out. "Your father did not leave you a traditional inheritance, Elijah," Halverson said, his voice carrying clearly into the hallway. "He placed the entire estate into a trust. You were granted temporary control as a trustee. That control was bound by one specific, non-negotiable condition." Elijah's hand holding the glass stopped halfway to his mouth. A flicker of doubt finally crossed his arrogant face. Behind him, several of his party guests had gathered in the hallway, watching the scene unfold. Among them was Marcus, a heavy-set man in a cheap suit with a thick neck, the creditor Chloe had warned me about. "What condition?" Elijah asked, his voice suddenly losing its bravado. "Section 4, paragraph B of the trust dictates that you must provide a permanent residence and continued employment for your brother, Mason Rowe," Halverson recited flawlessly from memory. "If you fail to do so, a poison pill clause is automatically activated." Elijah stared at him, his mouth slightly open. "Poison pill? Yes," I said, stepping forward so I was right in my brother's face. 3 days ago, you stood on this exact spot and evicted me. You told me I meant nothing. Yesterday, you finalized my termination from Row Logistics. You broke the one rule Dad gave you. Halverson raised the court order. We have the security footage. We have the HR documents. An emergency injunction was signed by Judge Harmon an hour ago. The condition has been violated. Your status as trustee is permanently revoked. Elijah's face turned the color of old ash. Revoked? What does that mean? I still get the money, right? I'm his son. You get nothing, Halverson said coldly. The trust clearly states that upon violation of the condition, all assets, all bank accounts, all property, and all corporate shares are instantly transferred to the sole, permanent beneficiary. Halverson pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. Mason Row. The silence that fell over the porch was absolute. The only sound was the wind rustling the dead leaves in the yard. Elijah looked at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate panic. No, that's impossible. Dad wouldn't do that. He loved me. He gave me the promotion. He gave me the watch. He gave you a test, Elijah, I said, my voice steady and cold. He knew exactly who you were. He knew you were greedy. He knew you were cruel. He gave you the power just to see if you would use it to destroy me. And you did it in less than 24 hours. This is a trick, Elijah suddenly screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged forward, grabbing the lapels of Halverson's coat. You fake lawyer. I'll sue you. I'll sue everyone. The two deputies moved with terrifying speed. In a fraction of a second, they grabbed Elijah by the arms, spun him around, and slammed him chest first against the heavy oak door. His glass shattered on the porch, spilling expensive liquor over his shoes. Keep your hands to yourself, sir, the larger deputy warned in a low, dangerous rumble. Marcus, the heavy-set man from the hallway, pushed his way to the front. He looked at Elijah, then at Halverson. Hey, lawyer, are you saying he doesn't have the money? He doesn't own the commercial real estate. Mr. Rowe currently owns the clothes on his back and a heavily financed sports car in the driveway, Halverson stated clearly. He has no access to the $44 million estate. Marcus's face turned purple. He leaned down close to Elijah's ear. You owe my bosses $3 million, you stupid punk. You told me the warehouse sale was happening tomorrow. You better find a place to hide. Marcus turned around and stormed out of the house, shoving past the other guests. Elijah was hyperventilating. The deputies released him, and he slid down the doorframe, collapsing onto the porch. The arrogant golden boy, the man who had tormented me, the man who had abandoned our father on his deathbed, was a shaking, sobbing mess. He looked up at me from the ground. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with sweat. The superiority was entirely gone, replaced by naked, pathetic fear. Mason, he begged, reaching a shaking hand out toward my shoe. Mason, please. You can't do this. I'm your brother. We share the same blood. I have debts, Mason. Very bad people are after me. If I don't pay them, they will kill me. Please, we can share it. I'll let you run the company. Just give me my cut. I looked down at him. I remembered the nights I spent sleeping in a hospital chair. I remembered the funeral where he checked his phone while they buried our dad. I remembered the cold rain hitting my face when he locked me out. You burned the bridge while you were standing on it, Elijah, I said quietly. I was grieving, he cried out, grasping at straws. I didn't know what I was doing. You knew exactly what you were doing. You showed me exactly who you are. I stepped back, out of his reach. The lawyer will give you 10 minutes to pack one suitcase. After that, the deputies will escort you off my property. If you ever come near this house or the company again, I will have you arrested. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment, one, below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. While the deputies stood guard in the hallway, watching Elijah frantically throw designer clothes into a single suitcase, another car pulled into the driveway. It was a silver Mercedes. Uncle Robert stepped out, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He was wearing a light gray suit, probably coming over to celebrate the impending sale of our family's legacy. He walked up the steps, seeing the sheriff's cruisers, and stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes darted from the deputies to Halverson, and finally to me. The fake, patronizing smile vanished. "Mason," Robert said, his voice tight. "What is going on here? Why are the police at the house?" I walked slowly down the porch steps until I was standing face to face with him. For my entire life, I had let this man make me feel small. I had let him dictate my worth. Not anymore. "We are just doing some house cleaning, Uncle Robert," I said. "Elijah is moving out. Permanently." The trust activated the poison pill. He violated the terms of Dad's will, and he lost everything. I am the sole owner of Rowe Logistics and this estate. Robert's jaw literally dropped. He blinked rapidly, his mind desperately trying to calculate the new reality. He had spent months grooming Elijah, winding him up, pushing him into debt, all for this moment. And now the puppet was broken. But Robert was a survivor. Like a snake shedding its skin, he instantly tried to pivot. He let out a loud, theatrical sigh and put a hand on his chest. "Mason, my boy," Robert said, his voice thick with fake relief. "Thank God. I have been so worried about the company. Elijah was out of control. I tried to guide him, but he wouldn't listen. Now that you are in charge, we can finally steer the ship right. You and me, Mason, will be a great team." I actually laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. I reached inside my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded copies of the draft contracts Chloe had sent me. I slapped the papers hard against Robert's chest. He instinctively grabbed them. "You think I'm as stupid as he is?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know about the dummy LLC, Robert. I know about your plan to buy the commercial real estate for pennies on the dollar and lease it back to bankrupt the company." Robert looked down at the papers. His hands started to shake. "Mason, this is a misunderstanding. This was just a contingency plan. Save it." I cut him off. "I spent 5 years cleaning up your messes. Dad kept you on the payroll out of pity. He knew you were a failure. He knew why your wife filed for a messy divorce. He knew why you lost custody of your kids. Because you are a parasite." Robert's face turned a violent shade of red. He opened his mouth to shout, but I took a step closer, invading his space. "I have already sent these documents to the corporate fraud division of the FBI. I lied smoothly. "I hadn't yet, but he didn't know that. If I ever see your face in my building, if you ever try to contact me, or if you even drive down the street again, I will make sure you spend the rest of your pathetic life in federal prison. Now get off my property." Robert stared at me. He looked into my eyes and saw that the quiet, obedient nephew was dead. He didn't say another word. He turned around, practically ran to his Mercedes, and sped out of the driveway, his tires squealing on the wet pavement. A few minutes later, Elijah was escorted out the front door by the deputies. He dragged a heavy Louis Vuitton suitcase behind him. He didn't look at me. He walked down the driveway, a broken, terrified man. The deputies waited until he climbed into his heavily financed Porsche and drove away. Then, they tipped their hats to Halverson and drove off. The party guests had scattered like roaches when the lights turned on. I was standing on the porch, alone with the lawyer. "Excellent work, Mason," Halverson said quietly. "I will have the locks changed within the hour. Tomorrow we go to the bank." "Thank you, Arthur," I said. It was the first time I called him by his first name. Halverson left, and the locksmith arrived shortly after. By sunset, the house was entirely mine. It was massive, silent, and for the first time in 5 years it felt peaceful. The oppressive weight of Elijah's arrogance and Robert's manipulation was gone. I walked slowly through the downstairs rooms. I picked up the shattered glass from the porch. I wiped down the counters in the kitchen. I was claiming my space. Finally, I walked up the grand staircase and stood in front of Dad's private study. The door was closed. I turned the brass knob and pushed it open. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and faintly of his cologne. His heavy mahogany desk sat in the center of the room. Behind it was a massive bookshelf. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, silver key from the red manila folder. Dad's note had told me the key was for his safety deposit box at the bank. But I knew my father. He hated banks. He didn't trust them with his most personal items. I walked over to the bookshelf, reached behind a thick volume of American history, and pressed a hidden latch. A section of the bookshelf swung outward, revealing a heavy steel wall safe. I inserted the silver key and turned the combination lock to my own birthday. The heavy metal door clicked open. Inside, there weren't stacks of cash or stock certificates. There was a single, worn leather journal. It belonged to my mother, Eleanor, who had passed away when I was 10. Dad had kept it locked away for almost 2 decades. Sitting on top of the journal was a fresh piece of paper, folded in half. It was another note in Dad's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Mason, if you are standing in this room reading this, it means you won. It means you survived the storm, and you purged the poison from this family. I am so incredibly proud of the man you have become. I want you to know the truth. I knew Elijah was broken from the time he was a teenager. I saw the greed in his eyes. I saw the cruelty. But I also saw how much you loved the company, and how much you loved our family. If I had simply fired Elijah and handed you the keys, he would have spent the rest of his life suing you, harassing you, and trying to destroy what you built. He would have played the victim. I had to let him destroy himself. I had to play the blind, foolish father. I had to give him the rope, knowing it would hurt you in the short term so that you could be free of him forever. I am sorry I let you believe I didn't see your hard work. I saw every minute of it. The company is yours. The legacy is yours. Make it better than I ever did. Love always, Dad. I sat down in his heavy leather desk chair. I held the note in both hands, and for the first time since my father's death, I truly broke down. The tears came hot and fast, washing away the years of resentment, the years of feeling invisible. My father had never been blind. He had been a master tactician, enduring the pain of playing the villain in my eyes, just to build an impenetrable fortress around my future. The house was quiet, but I was no longer alone. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of aggressive restructuring. I took over the corner office at Row Logistics, but I didn't sit behind the desk very often. I spent my time down on the dispatch floor, in the maintenance garages, and on the road with our drivers. My first official act as the sole owner and CEO was to fire David, the CFO. I didn't give him a massive severance package. I called him into my office on a Monday morning. He walked in, looking nervous, clutching his iPad. "Sit down, David," I said, not looking up from the financial reports on my desk. "Mason, I just want to say, the transition has been very smooth. I'm glad we could keep the ship steady," he started, trying to use his corporate speak to smooth over his betrayal. I looked up at him. "David, on the day of my father's funeral, you stood next to my brother while he threw me out of my own home. You knew I was the one who saved the Ohio contract. You knew I was the one doing the work. But you calculated that Elijah had the power, so you sided with the bully." David swallowed hard. "I was just following the legal documents at the time, Mason. It was purely professional." "Loyalty is professional, David. You don't have it. You're fired. Security is waiting outside your office to escort you to your car." He tried to argue, but I simply pointed to the door. Once he was gone, I called Chloe into the office. She had been my eyes and ears, the one person who risked her own job to help me when I had nothing. "Chloe," I said, smiling at her shocked expression, "I'm restructuring the executive board. I need an active, intelligent vice president of operations. Someone who actually knows how the floor runs." She put a hand over her mouth. "Mason, are you serious?" "I'm deadly serious. The promotion comes with the corner office next to mine, a company car, and a salary that reflects your actual worth. We have a lot of work to do, and we did the work. We purged the toxic culture Elijah had started to cultivate. I raised the base salary for our warehouse workers. I implemented a new training program for the drivers. We didn't just survive the transition, we thrived. Within a year, we had secured 2 new massive national contracts. Row Logistics was stronger than it had ever been. But as my father always said, a cornered rat will eventually try to bite. Almost exactly a year after my father's death, I received a thick legal packet in the mail. It was a notice of a civil lawsuit. Elijah and Uncle Robert had joined forces. They were utterly broke. Elijah's sports cars had been repossessed. He had narrowly avoided prison for his gambling debts only because Uncle Robert had liquidated his own retirement accounts to pay off the Vegas creditors, leaving them both destitute. Now, desperate and angry, they found a sleazy, ambulance-chasing lawyer willing to take a case on contingency. The lawsuit claimed that my father, Edward Rowe, was mentally incompetent and suffering from medical delirium when he established the Revocable Living Trust. They claimed I had exerted undue influence over a dying man to steal the inheritance. They wanted the trust voided. They wanted the $44 million. I called Halverson immediately. He didn't sound worried. In fact, he sounded bored. "Let them proceed to the mandatory pre-trial mediation," Halverson said. "It will save us the trouble of destroying them in a public courtroom." 2 weeks later, we walked into a sterile conference room in a downtown mediation center. Elijah and Robert sat on the opposite side of a long glass table. They looked terrible. Elijah had lost weight, his expensive clothes hanging off his frame. His eyes were dark and hollow. Robert looked 10 years older, the slick arrogance replaced by a twitchy desperation. Their cheap lawyer, a sweaty man in a poorly fitting suit, started aggressively. "We are prepared to take this to a jury," the lawyer blustered. Edward Rowe was on heavy narcotics during his final months in hospice. He lacked the legal capacity to create a complex trust instrument. My clients were wrongfully disinherited due to the manipulative actions of Mason Rowe. Halverson sat quietly, letting the man speak. He opened his elegant leather briefcase and pulled out a small flash drive. He plugged it into the large television screen mounted on the wall of the conference room. "Counselor," Halverson said smoothly, "before we discuss settlements or jury trials, I think you should view a piece of evidence that we are required to submit in discovery." Halverson clicked a button on a remote. The screen flickered to life. It was a video recording. The timestamp showed it was filmed exactly 2 weeks before my father died. The video showed my father sitting in his hospital bed in our house. He looked frail, yes, but his eyes were sharp and focused. Sitting next to him was a man in a white coat. For the record, the man in the video said, "My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, Chief of Neurology at State Memorial Hospital. I am conducting a comprehensive cognitive capacity evaluation of Mr. Edward Rowe." For the next 20 minutes, the video showed my father flawlessly answering complex questions about his finances, the current stock market, the exact operational details of his company, and his specific intentions for his estate. He was sharper than half the people in the mediation room. Then, my father looked directly into the camera. "I am establishing a revocable living trust." Dad's voice rang out through the conference room. "I am doing this specifically because my eldest son, Elijah, is financially reckless and morally bankrupt. I am also doing this to protect my estate from my brother, Robert, who has a history of financial fraud. I am of sound mind. I know exactly what I am doing. I am protecting my true legacy, Mason." The video ended. The silence in the mediation room was suffocating. I looked across the table. Elijah was staring at the black television screen, his mouth hanging open. The reality of his father's complete and utter rejection finally broke through his delusion. Robert had his face buried in his hands. Their lawyer was packing his briefcase with frantic speed. He knew a dead case when he saw one. Halverson leaned forward, resting his arms on the glass table. "If you proceed with this frivolous lawsuit, we will not only introduce this video, But we will countersue for malicious prosecution, emotional distress, and we will demand full reimbursement of all legal fees. Given your client's current financial difficulties, I suspect that would result in personal bankruptcy for both of them. Halverson paused, letting the threat hang in the air. I suggest you drop the suit with prejudice. Today, Elijah didn't look up. He just gave a small, defeated nod. The war was officially over. A few days later, I drove out to the cemetery. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn morning. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I didn't take my new company car. I took the old, rusty box truck that Dad used to drive when he first started Row Logistics. We kept it in the back of the maintenance yard as a piece of history. It rattled and shook, and it smelled like old oil and hard work. I parked the truck and walked up the gentle green hill to my parents' gravesite. They were buried side by side under a massive oak tree. I didn't bring flowers. I brought a copy of our latest quarterly financial report, showing record-breaking profits and the lowest employee turnover rate in the history of the company. I placed the folder gently on the grass between their headstones. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind blow through the branches. I thought about everything that had happened over the last year. I thought about the cold rain on my face when I was thrown out. I thought about the desperate look in Elijah's eyes when he realized his arrogance had cost him his empire. Society tells us a lot of lies about family. We are told that blood is thicker than water. We are told that loyalty is an automatic birthright. But that's not true. Blood can be toxic. Sometimes, the people who share your DNA are the ones who will sell you out the fastest for $1. Family isn't just a biological accident. It's a series of choices. It's the people who stand by you in the emergency room at 2 in the morning. It's the assistant who risks her job to help you uncover the truth. It's a father who is willing to play the villain to ensure his son is strong enough to survive the real monsters in the world. My father didn't leave me $44 million because I needed the money. He left it to me because he knew I would protect the people who built it. He taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. A true legacy, true loyalty, and true respect cannot be inherited on a piece of paper. You have to prove it. You have to earn it. And you have to fight for it. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long one, but sharing it here feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Life can throw incredible curveballs, especially when it involves the people we are supposed to trust the most. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your own peace and your own future? Let me know down in the comments. I read as many as I can. Now, for my special group of people. If you are still hearing my voice right now, you are part of the 1% club. I want you to go down to the comments right now and type the letter W. W stands for winner. It's a secret signal just for us so I can recognize the amazing people who watched this entire journey to the very end. If my story brought you any value, please hit that like button and follow the channel. We are building a great community here, and I have many more stories to share with you. Until next time, stay strong, trust your instincts, and never let anyone tell you that you don't matter.